little gruff, or actually,
Well, he sounds it more than he is, you know.
yeah, busy. I could see his good heart when he,
Yes, he actually has a really good heart.
yeah, yeah. No. Oh, I didn't practice changing screens. Okay, that works. That works.
Phyllis, it's Carol.
Yes,
Are you okay if I make you host?
sure,
And then I'll leave?
sure.
Okay.
I know where to find you if I need you.
I think it's all up and running, right?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right. I'm going to make you host.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
So when is your family coming in?
This is the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and leaving the Saturday after, so a week, but it's 5 of them, so it's a lot to figure out where to sleep and everything. I got them tickets for Broadway show on Wednesday, so I can actually just cook. I'm trying a lot of cooking now and freezing and seeing if I have this book on diva, I don't know, how to freeze Thanksgiving dinner a month ahead.
Oh, great. That's
I don't know, testing it to see. I have a lot more testing to go, but
you could always test here. I like to eat.
Okay. That's a thought. I will test for the Christmas thing. I'll bring them samples beforehand. How's
Hi, Phil. Hi, Phyllis.
Hi, Deb. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I'm used to Mary cooking.
Right?
I was just talking about it. December cooking. Yeah. What kind of food do you like? What kind of
I like everything.
Okay, well, then you're a good person to ask. We're just trying to figure out Christmas.
Oh, menu. Gee. That's a hard one. I always think the side dishes are the hard things to make.
Oh, for me, it's the cookies. Oh, for Thanksgiving, yeah.
Oh, for Thanksgiving.
It's all about the sides. You're right.
Right.
And everybody has their favorite, and you have to include that in it. So you need sweets and regular mashed potatoes, and you need stuffing and so much carbs. It's crazy.
I know. I'm looking forward to this garden. Looks so beautiful.
Oh, she's a crazy lady. You're going to either fall in love with her or think, what a screwball. But,
okay.
Yeah, she's fascinating. I read a few books on her. There was a new one that came out this summer on her idiosyncrasies, I guess.
Yeah, I remember I went to the Doris Duke home, and her gardens are a little crazy too.
It's not many women that have museums, so
it's people who really love what they do. They go, overboard
passionately, and in so many directions. Music, fabric, clothes. Everything had to be put together. Men, just hang a painting on a wall. The Frick Museum, it's lovely, or the Barnes Museum, lovely, but you don't arrange things around it to complement it so much.
Right. But, okay. Well, I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
thank you.
We'll save you a seat.
You know what the bulbs if you can have that?
they meet.
It's not quite as pretty as I like it to be, but it's not terrible.
Is it okay to go, Phyllis?
Um, just, I'm gonna turn these bells off first.
No problem.
1 more minute.
Okay, no problem on my end. I just.
Only half the people are here.
Well, that's a, well.
They're gonna come in later.
I don't.
If they come in later, it's their loss.
That's true.
Always kind. Well, 46 isn't bad. There we go, it's pretty.
Mary, go ahead, start now.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming along with me today, and thank you Phyllis, of course, and Jericho Library for your gracious invitation. This lecture is broken up into two parts. The second part will look at all the wonders found inside of the ISGM, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. But in order to understand and appreciate the uniqueness of this museum, we must first take a look at the lady herself. The truly remarkable Isabella. She's a lady known for her radically free spirit and her strong, outspoken voice during a time of rigid conventions for women. She had a deeply held belief that art possessed the power to change people's lives. As reported in a Boston newspaper, Mrs. Jack Gardner is one of the 7 wonders of Boston. There's no one like her in any city in this country. She's the leader of the smart set, but often leads where no one dared to follow. She imitates nobody. Everything she does is novel and original. This trendsetter was born in New York City on April 14, 1840, to a very wealthy family. The eldest of 4 children, Isabella was the only one of the 4 to survive to adulthood, and she was totally doted upon. Her father made his fortune first by importing Irish linen, and then through mining and real estate investments. The family lived on University Place in the West Village. Her ancestry, she often claimed, dated back to the Stuart dynasty, the kings of Scotland. From the age 5 to 15, she attended a nearby academy for girls, where she studied art, music, and dance, as well as French and Italian. Attendance at Grace Church exposed her to religious art, music, and ritual. At the age of 16, she and her family moved for a time to Paris, and she enrolled in a school for American girls. While making the grand tour with her parents during school vacations, she went to Italy, and while visiting Milan at the age of 17, she fell in love with a building, the Museo Paldi Pozzoli. When in Milan, I too was enchanted by this private home of a family where individual rooms were decorated and furnished to match the Renaissance paintings that had been collected and hung on the walls. Masterpieces such as the Lamentation over the Dead Christ by Botticelli, or the Portrait of a Young Woman by Piero de Pagliolo. I never get that name right. In each room, there were some complementary weaponry, glasswork, ceramics, jewelry, and furnishings. The architect in rebuilding the palazzo in neoclassical style had even included an English-style interior garden with the museum itself, within the museum itself. And Isabella said at the time that if she were ever to inherit money, she would have a similar home for people to visit and enjoy. And thus the seed was planted, and the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum dream was born. Back in school, Isabella befriended a schoolmate, Julia Gardner, the sister of Jack, who was one of the most eligible bachelors in Boston. And shortly after returning to New York in 1858, Julia, playing Cupid, invited Isabella to Boston to meet John Lowell Jack Gardner. And 3 years her senior, Jack quickly fell in love with Isabella, and they were married in New York's Grace Church on April the 10th, 1860, shortly before her 20th birthday. The couple settled into an elegant townhouse-style mansion that Isabella's father gave them as a wedding present. At 152 Beacon Street in Boston, it was located in Boston's newest and most fashionable neighborhood, the Back Bay. They resided there for the rest of Jack's life. They had one child, Jackie, who tragically died of pneumonia just before his 2nd birthday. A year later, Isabella suffered a miscarriage and was told she could not bear any more children. Her close school friend and her sister-in-law, Julia, died at just about the same time, and Isabella became extraordinarily depressed and withdrew from society. On the advice of doctors, she and Jack traveled to Europe, and Isabella was so ill she had to be taken aboard the ship on a stretcher. The couple spent almost a year traveling, visiting Scandinavia and Russia, but most of their time was centered in Paris and Venice. The trip had the desired effect on Isabella's health and became a turning point in her life. It was on her trip that she began her lifelong habit of compiling and keeping scrapbooks and journals, documenting all the art and cultures that she explored with her husband, and that was later to serve as an inspiration for her museum. In 1874, Isabella and Jack Gardner visited the Middle East, Central Europe, and Paris. And beginning in the late 1880s, they traveled frequently across America, Europe, and Asia to discover foreign cultures and expand their knowledge of the art of the world. In between trips back in Boston, Isabella created much fodder for the gossip columns of the day, with a reputation for stylish tastes. Here we see her, she's over on the right and her husband's on the left, at a dinner party that she was throwing with diamond clips adorning her hair. The Boston Society pages called her by many names, including Belle, Donna Isabella, Isabella of Boston, and Mrs. Jack. And instead of following the hounds to hunt or checking in on the polo match scores like other society women, she was a die-hard Red Sox fan. Her surprising appearance at a 1912 concert at what was then a formal Boston Symphony Orchestra, wearing a white headband emblazoned with the words, "Oh, you Red Sox," was reported at the time to have almost caused a panic, and still remains in Boston one of the most talked about of her eccentricities. Anyone even today who enters the ISGM Museum wearing any Red Sox paraphernalia receives a discount of $2 from the entrance fee. Another legend in her making was her affinity for the Boston Zoo, centering on, of all things, the lion cage. She was celebrated in the Boston newspaper for the escapade of walking around the zoo, leading a lion by its mane. The story escalates, and some reports stated that she paraded around the city, up Tremont Street, even into the public gardens, with 2 lion cubs in tow. Over the summer, I read an intriguing new historical fiction called The Lioness of Boston, and its focus was on this period of her life. When quoting from the book's jacket cover, quote, "Newly transported to Boston, she was puzzled by the frosty reception she received from stuffy blue bloods. She tried everything to fit in, and after 2 devastating tragedies and rejection from the upper society, Isabella discovered her own true spirit and cast off all expectations of acceptance. She was a 20th century thinker in a 19th century, a courageous soul who rebelled and was determined to live on her own terms. She immersed herself into Boston's intellectual circles, joined the Dante Society, and became obsessed with collecting rare printed editions and illuminated manuscripts. At Harvard, she befriended Bernard Berenson, a young art student who began guiding Isabella in amassing an astonishing collection that we'll soon be exploring. Nearly 70 works of art in her collection were acquired with the help of this connoisseur, Berenson. Hundreds of letters she wrote to him are still available, and some will be quoted in this presentation, as were many of his descriptions of the masterpieces that they both adored. But there's also evidence that he swindled her quite a bit, purchasing art for one price and then charging her tens of thousands of dollars above the 10% fee that he was actually entitled to. Although there are no titles or descriptions of the works of art attached to each painting or object in the museum, there are quotes by Isabella and a wall that traces important events in the life of the museum, such as this one. In 1891, upon the death of her father, Isabella inherited $1.6 million. Now the scope of her art collecting was raised up to a new level. One of her first acquisitions was the Concert by Vermeer, purchased at a Paris auction house, which Isabella herself personally attended, signaling at the time with a handkerchief to her buying agent to up the bid one more time. It was a point of pride that she outbid other museums for it. The earliest works in the Gardner collection were accumulated during her trips to Europe, and the Gardners began to collect in earnest in the late 1890s, rapidly building a world-class collection, primarily of paintings and sculpture, but also included tapestries, photographs, silver, ceramics, manuscripts, columns, architectural elements such as doors, stained glass windows, and mantelpieces. She purchased some of it on her own, but she often asked her male colleagues to purchase on her behalf, as it was still uncommon for women to participate in art collecting. Isabella Stewart Gardner's favorite foreign destination was always Venice. The Gardners regularly rented the Palazzo Barbaro, a major artistic center for a circle of American and English expatriates in Venice. It was there that this painting was made of Isabella, exuberant and irrepressible as ever, as she was about to watch the fireworks over the Grand Canal. While in Venice, Gardner bought art and antiques, attended the opera, and dined with expatriate artists and writers. In 1894, her 10-year relationship with Bernard Berenson had ripened into one of advisor and collector, and by now, the Gardner home at 152 Beacon Street was packed full of glorious works of art from all over the world. With all these purchases, Isabella and Jack began to discuss moving their artworks out of their home. According to the Gardner Museum, Isabella's purchase of Rembrandt's 1629 self-portrait is what finally inspired the Gardners to create a proper museum. Quote, she wrote, "Years ago, I decided that the greatest need in our country was art. We were a very young country, and we had very few opportunities for people to see beautiful things, works of art, etc. So I was determined to make it my life's work if I could." After Jack's sudden death in 1898, Isabella realized their shared dream of building a museum for their treasures. She purchased land for the museum in marshy Fenway Fenway area of Boston, and she hired the architect Willard T. Sears. This is a clip from the paper when she started building the museum, and people couldn't understand what it could possibly be about. And they kept insisting it's a weird wall. They weren't sure what was going to be behind it. She was keeping it a little bit of a secret. And they kept calling it the weirdest wall ever conceived by whim of a woman. The fact that a woman would be doing this just mystified people, and a society woman at that. So she presented the architect with plans that were modeled on the Renaissance Palace of Venice that she loved so much. Now, a typical Venetian palace would look out on the water, but Isabella turned that view inside out. She turned it inward, and she designed a magnificent courtyard filled with ancient art and made that the heart of her museum. She designed it, you can see in the background, the same look as the palace that she loved so much in Venice, the Barbaro Palace. Isabella was deeply involved in every aspect of the design, leading the architect, Sears, to quip that he was merely the structural engineer and Gardner that made Gardner's design possible. She was often on locale with the builder. She was often on site, up on the scaffolding with him to ensure that her vision was carried out to her specifications. She wrote, "I still go daily, dinner pail in hand, to my Fenway Court, as the museum was then called. That's my work," she wrote to Bernard Berenson in 1902. And here she is up on the roof with her beloved Kitty Wink, boldly inspecting the roof of Fenway Court, which was then still in construction in 1901. After the building was ready, Gardner spent a year carefully installing her collection according to her own personal taste and aesthetic. The gallery installations, paintings, sculpture, textiles, furniture from different periods and cultures all combined to create a rich, complex, and very unique narrative. Fenway Court privately opened for invited guests on January 1st, 1903, with a grand opening celebration featuring a performance by members of the Boston Symphony Orchestra playing Mendelssohn's Octet in E-flat major, Opus 20. And then the guests had the curtains drawn back and they filed into a totally new idea, Isabella's glass-covered courtyard, the first of its kind in America, complete with palm trees and glorious delphiniums. They enjoyed a menu that included, well, you can tell it was inspired by Isabella, it included champagne and donuts. Why not? February 23rd to 25th, 1903 was the first time that the space was truly used as a museum, and admission was limited to 200 visitors a day, and the cost was $1 per person. While alive, Isabella Stewart Gardner herself lived on the 4th floor and used that as her residence. Over the next 20 years, Isabella also filled the museum with visual and performing artists. Concerts were held weekly, and John Singer Sargent set up a painting studio in the Gothic Room. In 1919, Isabella Stewart Gardner suffered the first of a series of strokes, but she remained active during the next 5 years. And during this period, Sargent painted Mrs. Gardner in white, 1922, about which she wrote to Berenson's, quote, "Did I tell you of Sargent's wonderful sketch in watercolor of me, which keeps everyone's tongue wagging? Even I think it's exquisite. As it was utterly unpremeditated, both by him and by me, I think that's the main reason for it being so good." On July 17, 1924, at the age of 84, Isabella died, leaving her cherished museum, quote, "for the education and enjoyment of the public forever." She's buried in the Gardner family plot at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Her will created an endowment of $1 million and outlined stipulation for support of the museum, including that the permanent collection not be significantly altered. A devout Anglo-Catholic, she requested in her will that ministers celebrate an annual memorial requiem mass for the repose of her soul in the museum chapel. This duty is still performed each year on her birthday. And now that we've paid homage to the lady, I feel we're ready to enter her personal work of art, the museum that she created. Her philosophy in creating the museum can be seen in this letter she wrote to Berenson. Don't you agree with me that my museum ought to have a few and all of them A number ones? Let us aim awfully high. If you don't aim, you can't get there. Shan't you and I have fun with my museum? In 1920, the museum was suffering growing pains. The wear and tear from close to 200,000 visitors each year exposed the collection to damage. The question now was how to bring Isabella's legacy into the 21st century. A daring plan was conceived that included office space, a cafe, classrooms, offices, a museum shop, an exhibition floor, and other facilities. An artist in residence program was also on that wish list. When Renzo Piano did his first walkthrough of the Gardner Museum, he took in the courtyard, the architecture, and the collection, and he just said this lady was mad. I have to quit this job. No one can do it. But 4 major design proposals later, after $100 million had been raised, the plans were finalized and the construction began. 2.5 years later, the new wing opened in 2012, not too long ago. One of the challenges of creating the new wing was to both respect and complement Isabella's vision. Piano said that the building must be, quote, a respectful nephew to the great aunt. He obsessed about the correct distance between the historic place, you can see on the right, and the new wing, likening it to 2 people needing to be just the right distance from each other to have a conversation. His answer was to connect the 2 buildings with a glass corridor through which visitors progress through gardens into the courtyard. The outside of the new building has been designed so that a portion of it is given over to a revolving stream of artists in residence whose work is showcased for 6 months at a time. And here we finally get to see the museum entrance. Going through the new wing, it sets the tone with openness and nature all around. The museum is free to anyone who can identify herself as Isabella. You have to really prove it, though. You can't just have your friend call you Isabella. It doesn't work. They're all named Isabella, free, $2 off of you. Oh, it's right 2 blocks away from the Museum of Fine Arts of Boston. So it's an amazing thing. I mean, they were having a Botticelli exhibit there one day and I had to see it. So I took a JetBlue in the morning at like 6 o'clock, went to the Boston Museum of Fine Art to see Botticelli, went across the street to Isabella Gardner Museum, and I flew back that night. It was an exciting day. I got to see my son who lives in Boston in between, now that I think about him. But it wasn't all museums at that point in time. Across from, okay, so there's the admission desk. I took that when I was there. And right across from it, there's the greenhouse you can see in the background, and you can enter into the greenhouse and see the flowers that are grown there that they're going to be on display in the courtyard. Okay, this is the plan for the new wing, and everything there is pretty much made out of glass, so you can always see the flowers in the gardens behind it. You enter and you're in the living room with a coat and check and space to meet and greet friends. And then you'd progress onto the restaurant, the Cafe G, it's called, or Gardner, again with view of the gardens outside. They do have a terrific choice of food to dine on. I didn't have that, but the person next to me did. And I asked, can I take a picture? And she said, okay. Every museum needs a gift shop, and they do have one, and another view of it. And there's also a quote from Isabella that you can tote away with yourself. My garden is riotous, unholy, deliriously glorious, and I wish you were here. This is a grand staircase that was part of Renzo Piano's plan, modeled after Michelangelo's staircase in Florence and Rome, but this one constructed in glass instead of marble. And as you go up the stairs, you can see the gardens and the historic museum as you ascend into the music hall and exhibition space that the new wing allowed it to have. One room that I don't usually use my camera on is the ladies' room. But this powder room made such an impression on me that I had to take a snap.
Oh.
How she carried out her color. I know each little toilet was inside, but this was the outside of it. And I said, wait a minute now, I've never seen one like this. Her color scheme and her floral theme carried out everywhere throughout the museum. Also evident throughout the museum are words of advice, tenets to live by from Isabella to future generations. This one was actually in the powder room too. Win as though you were used to it and lose as if you liked it. I've got a feeling she was thinking about her Red Sox when she had that, when she said that or wrote it. Now, we're finally going to see the palace, the museum. We just have to cross through that linking glass corridor that Renzo Piano was inspired to create, and we're on the first floor of the palace. And here's a peek of all of the wonders. So you can see we entered through the corridor to the palace, and now here's a peek at all the wonders that we'll explore on the first floor. And we always have to start at that courtyard. It's visible from any gallery in the museum. On each floor as you go around, each room, when you look out the windows, you can go down and look and see this courtyard. It's the heart and soul of the institution, and it encapsulates Isabella Stewart Gardner's amazing taste. It's kind of an assault on all your senses. You smell the fresh flowers, you hear water falling as your eyes feast on artwork that Isabella brought together from all over the world, Africa, Italy, Spain, and Greece. It's home to several centuries of art that evoke radically different locales. It's part Roman sculpture garden. It's part Renaissance Venetian canalscapes that virtually were inspired by that Palazzo Barbaro that she so adored. It's also part medieval European cloister and turn of the century exhibition hall. Inside the courtyard is perhaps the most poignant piece of funeral sculpture in the collection. It's a child's Greek sarcophagus from about the year 250 AD, decorated with garlands that many interpret as a nod to Isabella's own little son, Jackie. It stands at the very center of the courtyard, at the foot of the Medusa mosaic. In 1892, an ancient Roman villa was discovered just north of Rome, containing well-preserved mosaic floors adorning the baths. The gardeners purchased the tiles, having delicate tracery of the mosaics, resembling those made in Pompeii around 25 AD. Only women inhabit this space. The figures depicted in its many artworks are all female.
Beautiful.
And surrounding them is a living, breathing work of art, the garden. It's surmounted by a glass vault, which highlights the plants changed almost every month. In February and March, tall, majestic calla lilies surround the courtyard's art, set off by unusual orchids that have been grown in the museum's greenhouse since Isabella's time. Through early April, cascades of hanging nasturtium vines make their brief appearance, celebrating the arrival of spring. This continues a tradition started by Isabella during the week before Easter to mark the return of color to the Fenway. The spring courtyard during April and May is ablaze with color. Pink azaleas, ivory and yellow daffodils. Flowering maples are used to flank the steps and statues to complement the springtime colors. May and June feature a variety of hydrangeas, both mophead and lacecap. July and August are when the chimney bellflower take over the courtyard. Its tall flowering stalks have masses of starry blue and white flowers. The museum horticulturalists grow this plant as a biennial from seed, and it takes 2 years to grow to the 6-foot height. Throughout the fall, this was probably what's theirs now, we'd see chrysanthemums whole court. A pink-tinged chrysanthemum variety, seen in the middle, was named after Isabella. The holiday courtyard features dark forest greens and shades of red and silver, showcasing masses of jade trees, silver dusty millet, and dark red winter blossoms of amaryllis. Ancient creatures, mighty heroes, and epic legends come to life with art and storytelling in the courtyard, which borders on the Spanish corridor. This hallway, framed with a collection of colorful tiles, ancient sarcophagi, and architectural fragments, all builds up to its culminating point. I'm going to say it wrong. Galileo. I practiced that and I didn't get it right. Galileo by John Singer Sargent, 1882. This work is often the first work encountered by visitors. It dramatically sets the stage for a walkthrough of the Gardner Museum, announcing that this is not like any other museum. Rather, it's a veritable feast for the senses in store for them. The painting is massive, taking up an entire wall. The name of the painting comes from an Andalusian dance that roughly is translated as the ruckus. This is a painting that you can hear as well as see, with heels, I should go back again, this is the one I wanted, with heels clicking, fingers snapping, hands clapping to the strings of the guitar. Isabella, with her sense of drama, created an elaborate setting for this painting, an alcove defined by a Moorish arch. The idea for this dramatic installation came when a cousin of her just asked her to babysit the Sargent painting as he was traveling abroad for the year. When he returned and saw that she had custom made a setting, that she had created this especially for his painting, he finally just raised up his hand, gave up, and gave her the painting on the spot. That's one way of persuading people to give you things, I guess. Above the two seated women, written in red, is the word Ole. And John Singer Sargent, 1822, is signed in black paint on the top right. You need really good eyes to see that, I'm sorry. After opening up her museum, Isabel took an interest in Spanish art, partly because Italian art was becoming very expensive, even for her. And at the other end of the Spanish corridor is this small chapel enclosed behind a decorative wrought iron gate that had formerly been part of a synagogue. In 1904, she visited Madrid, where she bought this sculpture, a tomb figure of an armored knight in repose, carved in stone. The alabaster had been intricately worked to show the textured pattern on the pillow and the chain mail on the armor, indicating that the deceased was an aristocratic knight. The knight is laying on his back with his legs outstretched and head and shoulders resting on two pillows. Isabella left instructions in her will that when she died, her body should be laid in state just outside of the chapel in the same position as her knight. And that's how personal a museum is. It's just amazing. You don't see that in the Frick or in the Barnes Museum when men put it all together. I mean, this woman really had a personal touch to each object and wanted to see it her way. The chapel is a solemn commemorative alcove, and it features an altar laid with textiles and other liturgical furnishings and a painting of the Virgin of Mercy from the work of Francesco de Zuberan. She was particularly attached to this painting as the Christ child remind her of the face of, I know you can guess, her little Jackie. There are 3 small rooms on the first floor with objects that reflect Gardner's personal relationships. They display the work of artists that in Gardner's closest circle of friends. First, there's the Blue Room. On display are 2 works by her good friend John Singer Sargent. This is a portrait of Madame Pierre Gautreau drinking a toast, otherwise known as Madame X. But this is a much smaller, more intricate more intimate portrayal of the lady. And there's this watercolor, Incensing the Veil by John Singer Sargent, showing a North African lady inhaling the smoke of ambergris burning from a brazier in front of her to ward off evil spirits. Also on view in this small room is The Return of the Lido by Ralph Wormley Curtis. This oil painting depicts a boat scene on the Venetian lagoon, and two figures on the glossy back gondola are facing us. A female figure sitting underneath a white canopy and a male gondolier standing up and navigating the boat. Ralph Curtis's painting of a gondola gliding through Venice must have held special meaning for Mrs. Gardner. Like the woman depicted, she and Curtis spent many hours in each other's company, floating through the canals. And there's this painting, which most wouldn't have made most of expositions or discussions about this museum, but I personally love it. It's called Chrysanthemum, and it's by Dennis Miller Bunker, who, when I read about it, I had to include it when I learned that the artist was from Garden City, New York. And besides, I know it was like, I tried to find out anything else about him, talked to the village historian here, and still haven't discovered anything, but I haven't given up on this. And besides the flowers, they are just so beautifully painted. Next door is the Yellow Room. And in the Yellow Room, and here we find The Terrace by Henri Matisse, 1904. This vertical oil on canvas painting is vibrant and colorful. And in the center of the painting, a figure, Matisse's wife, is dressed in a kimono, sitting on the terrace of a boathouse, almost hidden from the scene. The work was painted while the Matisse family was staying with the artist Paul Signac in the south of France. Oh, I gotta get the painting. There it is. I'm sorry. As Isabella didn't buy much modern art, she bought very few at all. This painting and several drawings by Matisse were given to her by a circle of friends who thought that the sensuous colors would appeal to her. She had a lot of good friends and relatives, it seems. One last room on the first level, a narrow gallery playfully named by Isabella the Vaticino, the Little Vatican. Located just a few steps from her desk, it originally contained 1,850 personal treasures. There would be photographs of her family and friends, travel journals, albums, newspaper clippings, souvenirs, and more than 1,000 books from her personal library. And also there, by my good friend, whom I'm going to find out about, Dennis Miller Bunker, this portrait of Isabella dressed in her fancy gown that she'd worn to the artist festival, a costume ball where everyone wore Venetian attire from the time of Paolo Veronese. And in her hand, she's holding the plans that she had just made for her new museum at Fenway Court. Now we journey upstairs to the second floor, where we'll visit the early Italian room, the Dutch room, and the Raphael room. And here are some of the highlights that floor holds for us. Just a little preview, a little sneak peek. In the Italian room, Isabella Stewart Gardner traveled all over the world, but visited Italy more than any other country. And this room takes its name from the collection of Italian Gothic and Renaissance paintings that line the walls and became the core of her collection. You got to take a look when you look at all of these rooms, though. It's not just the painting. I mean, every single thing in the room has a specially chosen, chosen thing. The chairs, I mean, even they're all from Europe. They're all like, it cost a fortune, just each little thing that we're going to see. So you have to just really spend some time looking at the room, not just the paintings. That line the walls and become the core of her collection. Surrounding the paintings are furniture and other decorative objects reflecting interest sparked by her extensive travels. Here we have Hercules by Piero della Francesca, 1470. This fresco once adorned Piero's house in San Sepolcro. It's the only non-religious painting that he ever made. Hercules is portrayed as a youth rather than the bearded, muscle-bound figure that we are usually familiar with. Mrs. Gardner's effort to acquire the fresco were also Herculean. It was detached from the wall in 1860s, and in 1903 it was sold to the Gardner. However, the Italian government delayed the export until 1908, and when it arrived in America, it was seized by custom officials for payment of duty and fines. The Dormition and Assumption of the Virgin by Fra Angelica, 1424. Fra Angelica, a Dominican monk later named the patron saint of artists, made many innovations, moving away from the Gothic style to a more modern manner of painting, with new realism, individualized faces, the use of rich colors, and linear perspective. He blended spiritual content with a lyrical touch. The upper hand of the painting, we see the Virgin Mary being taken up into heaven. And in the bottom, we shows the Dormition, the death of Mary, where she's surrounded by Christ. And I kept looking at Christ in the center, and I'm thinking, what, has he got a doll in his hand? What is he carrying? And then I realized he's holding the soul of Mary, which he's in this painting of Fra Angelica. And when she's assumed into heaven, he's actually going to bring the doll, the soul of Mary, with him. Most of the paintings in the United States are just fragments of larger works, but this one's nearly intact, and it was greatly admired by everyone in Boston. Also in the room, and again, looking at all the furniture underneath, it's just amazing to me. This is The Virgin and Child with Saints by Simone Martini, 1320. It's the largest surviving work of Martini outside of Italy. Delicate and otherworldly with its gold background, typical of the Gothic style, this polyptych comes from the Church of Orvieto. Above the Virgin and Child is the victorious Christ bestowing a blessing. On the pinnacles above the saints, we can see angels summoning the Last Judgment with their trumpet. It was the debut of Martini's work in the United States. This is interesting. The Virgin and Child, John the Baptist, and Six Female Saints by Andrea Mantegna, 1497. Now, Mantegna rose to fame because he was the court painter of Isabella Gonzaga of Mantua. And that Isabella was the first lady of the Renaissance. She developed a space for her own painting gallery, her studiola and room to develop a growing collection within the ducal palace. That Isabella's letters reveal a longing for ancient art objects and sculptures. A bust of the Roman emperor, an onyx vase, a Venus given by Cesare Borgia, a Cupid from the ancient sculpture Praxiteles, and are all documented in her collection. She displayed the Cupid next to a sleeping Cupid by Michelangelo in order to compare those ancient and modern sculptures. She had this portrait made by no less than Leonardo da Vinci himself. Boston's Isabella fashioned herself as the later day Isabella d'Este. And so a painting by her idol's court artist, Andrea Mantegna, lent this historical fiction new meaning. So it was another inspiration for her. Now we enter the Raphael room. And again, look at all the furnishings in there. It's just, there's chairs. Each of them was probably, I don't know, maybe like hundreds of thousands of dollars nowadays. But, just for one of those wall sconces, I would give them, no, I wouldn't give them that to you. No, I wouldn't do that. Okay, entering the Raphael room in 1898, Isabella Stewart Gardner brought the first painting by Raphael to the United States. Named after the celebrated Renaissance painter, this room commemorates his achievements, and it evokes the moment when Italian artists began looking to ancient Greek and Rome for inspiration. Paintings by 15th and 16th century Italian painters are interspersed with ancient Roman wall paintings, sculptures, and vases. The Story of Lucretia by Sandro Botticelli, circa 1500. Here Botticelli creates 3 episodes in the story of Lucretia. In the first scene, beautiful and chaste, she attracts the attention of the king of Rome's son. He rapes her at gunpoint. At the right, she collapses in shame before her family and friends and commits suicide rather than live with the shame. And in the center, the public display of her corpse rallies an army to overthrow the corrupt regime, and according to legend, the Roman Republic was founded. She became the symbol of liberty, like David, who stands in the column above her. It was painted for a wedding ceremony, and with this in mind, Isabella placed it above a cassone, a wedding chest, a Roman version of what used to be called a hope chest. She placed a velvet cloth over the cassone and placed other textiles inside, along with an 18th century guitar. Here's another view of the Raphael room, and we find Tommasio Angarami by Raphael, 1510. Tommasio was a papal librarian of the Vatican collection of manuscripts. Lost in thought, he gazes upward, pausing as he copies a text from a leather-bound book onto a sheet of vellum. He worked for Pope Julius II at the same time that Raphael was creating frescoes, such as the School of Athens for the Pope's private apartments. Isabella wrote, quote, "My remaining pennies must go to the greatest Raphael and the greatest Michelangelo. Nothing short of that. I have tasted blood, you see." She wrote that to Bernard Berenson in 1902. And underneath Tommasio, we can see the Lamentation over Christ, 1503. Not satisfied with one Raphael, 2 years later, she purchased this small panel. It had once been part of the predella of an altarpiece for a convent in Perugia. The main panel of the altarpiece was purchased by J.P. Morgan, and he donated it to the Met, and it's now known in the Met as the Colonna altarpiece. Isabella set the painting on a table with a chair in front of it, as if to allow close meditation on the scene of Christ in the arms of his mother. It was placed perpendicular to a window to catch the daylight for viewing. Turning our attention to the opposite wall, still in the Raphael room, we come upon the Annunciation by Prometeo d'Amelia in 1487. D'Amelia was a pupil and assistant of Filippo Lippi, who painted the most ethereal and ravishing portraits of the Virgin and of the angel Gabriel. Often the Annunciation is depicted in dramatic and innovative architectural setting, but here the sweeping recession to the central doorway is the unifying element of the composition. The perspective lines on the floor divide the figures and focus the viewer's attention on the hilly landscape beyond. And now we return to the entrance way to the Raphael room, where on the left side of the door we find St. George Slaying the Dragon by Carlo Crivelli, 1470. Isabella was the first to bring a work by this Renaissance painter, Crivelli, to the United States. This vertical tempera on panel depicts St. George on a horse killing a dragon. Crivelli compressed the story of St. George, who saved a city and its princess from a meandering dragon, into a single dramatic moment. Run through with a lance, the monster roars in agony, frightening the saint's steed. The horse rears up and shies away, eyes wide in fear. In a feat of remarkable horsemanship, George stands, drops the reins, and draws his sword to deliver the death blow. The sky is painted with gold leaf that's flaking to reveal orange underneath. Below the castle, there's the blonde, light-skinned princess kneeling and praying on the ledge of the cliff. And now we move next door to the short gallery for a really short look at this painting, Isabella in Venice by her friend Andre Zorn, made during that happy time at the Barbaro Palace, overlooking the Grand Canals as fireworks went off. And now we are on to the Dutch. Oops, there we are. Now you see some blank paintings there and some frames, and I'm going to talk about the Dutch room a little bit later when we talk about the great theft that occurred in her museum. But here she's assembled in this room a collection of Northern Europeans' greatest portraitists: Rembrandt, Rubens, Holbein, Dürer. She also used this room. There's not a lot of furniture in this room because she used this also for entertaining. She'd have parties there, special, including one for Harvard's victory over on the gridiron over Yale in 1909. This room was also the scene of the tragedy when in 1990, 13 works were stolen from the Gardner Museum, 6 of them coming from this Dutch room. The frames were left in the spot where they were stolen from as a reminder to all what is still to this day lost. But still on view is the Earl of Arundel by Thomas Howard by Peter Paul Rubens. Rubens was one of the most illustrious painters in the history of Western art, and this portrait was made at the height of his career. The Earl is depicted as a warrior in full armor, wearing a large gold medallion on his chest. In his right hand, he holds a gold baton. The armor on his right arm and hand reflect the light. Arundel himself collected art on such a grand scale that he was given the nickname the Collector Earl. It was the most expensive painted that Isabella purchased after Titian's Rape of Europa, and her advisor Bernard Berenson wrote to her, quote, "You now have one of the true great Titians. Arundel will be a match for it." On the opposite side of the Dutch room, we very fortunately can still see the self-portrait of Rembrandt. It was taken back, and the thief was really, the 2 thieves came in to take all the Rembrandts. They removed this painting from the wall, and when they took it down, it was turned around. So when they collected everything, they actually left this one behind, much to our joy, and I'm sure the museum's joy. Rembrandt, okay, you can, yes, it was painted when he was 23 years old. Rembrandt produced more selfies than any other painter in history of art. Over 80 of them still survive, so he must have done even more, a lot more. Here he shows proficiency in painting textures from the silk of the scarf to the feather in the cap. And we see here that Rembrandt had a mustache and a short beard. The demand for Rembrandt paintings in the Gilded Age was greater than for any other old master, and this was the first of 4 that Isabella had captured. Here we see an interesting one, Mary I, Mary Tudor. I always interested, you hear about Bloody Mary, hear so much about him, and I was happy to see a painting of her. This is by Antonius More, 1554. The daughter of Henry VIII, we know the story, Catherine of Aragon, became Queen of England. The portrait was painted as an engagement present for her future husband, Philip, who was then heir to the Kingdom of Spain. Now, I was reading about him the other day. She really offered himself to her father, who's the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, and wrote a letter saying that she would like to marry him, and she offered herself in marriage to him. But he was very old and he was very sick. So he said, well, why don't you try? Why don't I send my son Philip instead? Philip did not want to go there. He was the heir to the King of Spain, and he really wanted, that was where his heart was set on, to becoming King of Spain. And here he's being sent off to cold England, and he marrying this lady who was pretty frigid. I mean, she was, never really had any intimate relationships at all. And meanwhile, he was, very libertine kind of person. And so when she miscarried and wasn't going to have a child, it seemed, she pretended she had a fake child, a child that she kept insisting that she was pregnant, but it never happened. And so he left and he went away for 2 years over to Brussels to have more fun, and left her behind. So, and she cried. She really mourned for him when he left. So she had a very sad life. Her dark eyes look directly at the viewer under almost invisible eyebrows. In her right hand, she holds a short red and white Tudor rose, and in her left hand, dark gloves with tan, pearl, and gold-studded cuffs. We're going to hear more about Philip a little bit later. The little salon, this totally charming room, is so tiny that it's only opened occasionally, as it's a very challenging room to guide any visitors through because of its many fragile items. It's amazing in this museum. Like, very few things are under glass. Like, everything is out in the open. I mean, I don't know, there's not another museum where you could go and actually touch these things. It blows my mind that so much of it is available. I guess they have small amount of people coming at a certain time, and maybe only a certain type person would actually be interested in coming there. There's not going to be a whole group of school children coming. Well, I'd like to think there are, though. That's hard now. Okay. So this, it's hard to guide visitors through because of the many fragile items, ceramics, tapestries, and also in there we have a painting by Boucher, Francois Boucher, painting the Chariot of Venus. This vertical oil on canvas painting depicts cherubs, a chariot, and birds in a blue sky above the clouds. You see a lot of this in Frick and the Frick Museum. There's a whole room, the Fragonoid room and the Boucher room. The pink chariot has pink fabric flowing over it that flows to the upper right corner of the painting. And now we advance to the 3rd floor. And we're going to take a short tea. We're going to go spend a lot of time in the Titian room. A short tease at all the masterpiece that we'll encounter there. And including the masterpiece, you see chairs, and you see ceramics, and you see vases. And it's not just a stained glass window, so it's not just the paintings. And we'll hurry over to the Titian room. This room is a stage for many of the museum's finest masterpieces by Titian, Velázquez, and Giovanni Bellini. And here we see her prize, The Rape of Europa by Titian, 1559. This painting has been called by many the most important old master painting in the United States. Painted in Venice, it was inspired by a story from Ovid's Metamorphoses. Jupiter, infatuated by the young princess Europa, changes himself into a beautiful white bull and joins a herd grazing by the seaside. Europa, you can't see that part in the picture. This is too close up. Let me get the whole picture. There it is. Okay, so over there. Okay. Europa, along with her companions, comes up to the bull and entwines flowers around his hair and climbs playfully onto his back. Jupiter seizes the opportunity and springs across the sea, spiriting Europa away as she clings on to one horn in total terror. Taking up most of the scene, a light-skinned Europa faces out towards us, almost horizontal on the bull's back. You can sense the emotion and the emotion as Europa, confused and anxious, dressed in a flowing white dress, has one breast and both of her legs revealed. I look at this and you think, how can anybody get the dimples or the cellulite on the legs or the little creases over there on her foot? I mean, things like that just makes you know that this has got to be the real thing, that there's very few artists that could ever do any of this. So she's gazing back in terror and she waves a red silk veil to attract the attention of her companions. No, they're on the shore. They're back there. And they respond with frantic signals. Titian dramatizes the situation by having scaly, menacing monsters in the foreground below, sort of a sea serpent coming out. And a tiny Cupid chases after Europa on a dolphin in a pose that sort of mimics her own. Jupiter races across the ocean with Europa, still on board, and lands in Crete. And their forced union results in the birth of Minos, the king of Crete, the Minotians, and the first civilization of Europe. This is one of 6 paintings inspired by Ovid's Metamorphoses that Titian painted for Philip II of Spain. He's the one that was married to Mary Tudor. Over a 10-year period, these 6 canvases, called poesie, or poetry in paint, as Titian was reaching for poetic qualities in painting, were produced. Philip had given Titian free rein to create new and innovative compositions, and he had the good sense to realize that in order to get Titian to do his best and deliver his best, you needed to give him freedom. Now, 2 years ago, this was amazing, the ISGM, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, was host to an amazing exhibition when all 6 of these poesie were reunited for the first time in the 16th century. So over here, the first one we see is Danae with a shower of gold. And then we see this one is a replica of it it's not this one, this one's in the, this is Adonis and Venus. It's from the National Gallery in London. We do have a copy of it or a variation of it at the Met. And then back there we have Celestis with Diana, and Actaeon and Diana, and Andromacles and Perseus, and the last one is the Rape of Europa. So to get all of these together, it was truly an amazing exhibition. Unfortunately, it was during at COVID time, so that not that many people could get to see it as probably should have. Berenson had alerted Isabella in 1896 that the painting was on the market, and she responded immediately, paying £20,000 for it, plus Berenson's commission to the Earl of Darnley. And then she wrote, "When comes Europa? I'm feverish about it. Do come over just to unpack her and set her up in her new shrine. Do." And she set the enormous canvas up in her red dining room in Beacon Street home between a bookcase and the ceiling. And despite the cramped arrangement, the painting attracted a crowd. And Gardner wrote, quote, "I am having a splendid time playing with Europa. She has adorers fairly on their knees. Men, of course." And then she wrote, "I am back here again tonight after a 2-day orgy. The orgy was drinking myself drunk with Europa and then sitting in my Italian garden in Brookline, thinking and dreaming about her." She spent a lot of time creating a bold and imaginative setting for this, her most treasured painting. She also made it very personal. It demonstrated her imaginative approach to all of her installations. Below the painting, she placed a textile. This was from a dress that she had, but it reminded her of the tail of the bull. I mean, that to me is amazing. It's from a ball gown by her favorite designer, Charles Worth of Paris. And just as Titian depicts the nymph Europa in a state of undress, she relinquishes one of her garments for public display. On the table below, an Italian bronze Cupid lies on its side, as though it simply dropped from the painting of the Cupids above. Throughout all of Isabella's museum, similar stories, intimate portrayals, and discoveries abound. Between the two windows in this room, all of those chairs are from the Borghese Gallery in Rome. I mean, like, how much did that cost to buy it from them? I mean, just the best of everything, and all of the items. It's not like they went to some of this from IKEA and picked it up, or a garage sale and picked it up. Every one of those was bought with a purpose in mind, and beautifully assembled by her. Between the two windows there, you'll see a chair and a table. A round table with a painting on it. And this was one of Isabella's favorite paintings, an oil and temper canvas. It's an unusually close-up view of Christ carrying the cross by the circle of Giovanni Bellini, 1505. By having Christ look directly at us, the artist makes us feel part of Christ's pain. Peering in closely, you can actually see tears on his cheek. Isabella bought this painting soon after her husband Jack died, and she created a memorial to him on the table. In the vase, she always kept fresh flowers. It's a tradition that the museum continues to this day. Looking at another view of the Titian room, we see King Philip IV of Spain by Diego Velázquez, 1528. "I am now awaiting the Velázquez," she wrote. When do you think Philip will be here to see his new world and get new subjects?" she wrote to Berenson in 1897. In this portrait, Philip is dressed in formal black court attire. When anyone came to Philip IV's court to request a favor, he would indicate his readiness to hear them by removing a hat and placing it on the table next to him, as we see here. In a pose he took often during official court meetings, his left hand holds the hilt of a sword and his right hand holds a folded note. In this painting, as opposed to a similar one at the Met and the Prado, he appears thinner and renders a more idealized form that was meant to enhance his stature as a supreme ruler. Thinking of him, Isabella wrote, "I can see that Europa, that Rembrandt, and that Velázquez anytime I want to. There's richness for you. Did I ever tell you that a very clever man once said that I was the Boston end of the Arabian Nights?" she wrote to Berenson in 1898. Moving along, quick stop at the Long Gallery and the chapel. One continuous room running along the east side of the building. It's an art gallery, an archive, a library, and a chapel all at once. To walk along this corridor is to stroll through time from antiquity to the turn of the 20th century and past a wide variety of objects, ancient sculptures, church furniture, modern letters, photographs, rare books, and then you come upon the stained glass window she could not resist buying. This lady did not have much sales resistance at all, I've got a feeling. It came from the Cathedral of Soissons in France, and it's considered by scholars to be the finest example of 13th century French stained glass in America. It survived the Huguenots' attack, the French Revolution, and World War I bombardments. The consecrated altar beneath the window was used by Isabella, a devout Anglo-Catholic, for the celebration of Mass, and every April, as specified in her will, a memorial service honors her memory. The cloth that adorns the altar was crocheted by Isabella herself. And on that long gallery, we would also find the Virgin, Child, and Angel by Sandro Botticelli, 1470. This painting does contain the calm prettiness of a Madonna and Child by Botticelli, but it also contains the element of allegory. The angel, the mother, and child are all looking down at a bowl of grapes, interspersed with grains of wheat that produce the bread and wine of the Eucharist. Mary is selecting some of the wheat, signifying that she accepts the fate that awaits her son. And now we enter the Gothic room. This room was totally closed to the public during Isabella's lifetime, and this is where Sargent set up his studio. It also served as a private refuge for her and a few close friends. Here, instead of the Italian palazzo style, she's reverted to the Gothic style. Setting the tone for this church-inspired interior is John Singer Sargent's reimagined Isabella in this life-size portrait of what Henry James called a Byzantine Madonna surveying her domain. The golden design encircling her head suggests a halo with a crown at the top. She stands facing us with her hands hanging down but rounded in almost a ballet-like pose. It floats on top of a chest, which gives it the altarpiece-like feel, positioned so that her clear eyes would meet ours. Around her neck is a pearl choker necklace from which dangles a large ruby. And around her waist hangs a double strand of pearls with a ruby hanging from the middle of each strand. A ruby also tops each of her shoes, which peek out from the bottom of her gown. Gardner admired Singer Sargent's, Gardner admired Singer Sargent's famous Madame X painting and conspired with him to create a similarly provocative work of art. In this portrait, her long black gown is close-fitting, accentuating her slim hourglass figure. The gown has short sleeves, a plunging V-neck revealing just traces of pink in a very suggestive area. And so scandalous was this painting that her husband never allowed anyone to see it. She paid $3,000 for the portrait and had rejected 8 renderings of her face before she was finally satisfied. She was 47 years at the time, but it was never placed on view at the museum until after her death. Contemporary viewers in Boston, accustomed to more conventional and flattering portraits, were mystified by Gardner's boldness. Also in the Gothic room, one last painting we'll look at is the Presentation of Christ in the Temple by Giotto in 1320. This painting shows the moment when Simeon and the prophetess Anna recognize the baby as the Savior. The child reaches across the table towards his mother in a very natural gesture. Isabella set the painting on a table with a chair, placed as if a viewer could sit and contemplate the work. And now we have to turn to a very sad day at the ISGM, March the 18th, 1990, in the hours just past midnight. St. Patrick's Day in Boston had just ended, but revelers were still carousing on the streets. when a vehicle pulled up near the side entrance of the museum. Two thieves disguised as police officers rang the buzzer, said they were responding to a disturbance and were let in through the employee entrance. The security guards were handcuffed and tied up in the basement. 81 minutes later, at 2:45 a.m., after making 2 trips to their car with artwork, the thieves departed with these 13 works of art, valued then at $500 million. The guards remained handcuffed until the police arrived at 8:15 a.m. when the director opened up the museum. The movement of the burglars were recorded on motion detectors. The best works taken were from the Dutch room, which they entered at 1:48 a.m. It's thought that their objective was to steal all of the Rembrandts, as every other Rembrandt in Massachusetts had recently been stolen. They smashed the glass and used box cutters to cut the artwork from the frames, leaving the frames strewn on the floor below where they once hung. Among the stolen masterpieces was Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee, 1633, Rembrandt's only seascape. The figure peering out at you toward the bottom is thought to be Rembrandt himself. This biblical scene pits nature against human frailty. The panic-stricken disciples struggle to keep the boat upright in a violent storm. Only Christ at the right remains calm. Rembrandt depicts the story as a contemporary event, and the spectacle of darkness and light formed by the churning sea and the blackening sky are masterfully rendered. Now, the images shown here, and we're going to do this, don't want to do that. Okay. Yeah. We're going to do this with pretty much all the pictures. You see the painting, and then you see the painting as it looked in the room before it was stolen. And then over to the right, you see that room now without the painting, with the blank mirror. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is The Lady and a Gentleman in Black, also by Rembrandt, 1633. Berenson described this painting in a letter to Isabella in 1898 as quiet, refined people lined in a dignified, distinguished way, and not scamped or rushed off like so many of Rembrandt paintings are, according to him. And again, we see first the painting, then how it looked at the museum before it was stolen, and how the museum looks at the right, how it looks now without the painting. And we have another painting by Rembrandt. This is a self-portrait in ink. It's the smallest work stolen by the Gardner. Portrait of an artist as a young man, made in 1633. And it was originally referred to as Rembrandt with the 3 mustaches, meaning there's one on Rembrandt's chin and one on his upper lip, and a third one, more or less, on the brim of his cap. And this painting's interesting. They thought at that time it had been thought to have been by Rembrandt, but later now it has been reassigned, and it is the work credited now to his pupil, Govert Flink. It's a stormy scene with the deliberately lit obelisk close, and it's very close to Rembrandt's own landscapes of the 1630s. And the most tragic of all was to lose this one, the concert by Vermeer, 1660. In a domestic parlor, 2 women and a man concentrate on making music. The standing woman raises her hand to keep time for her companions. The seated man, turned away from us, wears an elaborate sash, indicating that he was a member of the civic militia. This was the first major painting purchased by Isabella, the one that she herself had upped the bid on at the auction. And again, this painting, how it looks, wherever it is, hopefully it doesn't look any worse for where. This is one of those paintings where she always had a chair in front of it, that she loved it the most, and she herself would sit there and just admire it and dream herself into the painting. And also now how it looks in the Dutch room with the painting missing. Another painting stolen was Edward Manet's Chez Tortoni. It's the only work stolen from the first floor. It was in that small room where she kept paintings by people that she were close to, personal favorites. It hung in the Blue Room below a portrait of Manet's mother. And Garnier acquired it in 1922. And again, the 3 versions of 3 areas. And here's a look at the Dutch room with the 3 blank canvases. The theft has been the topic of great publicity, and it's etched itself into popular culture. Here, Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft appears in an episode of The Simpsons. Okay, the burglars worked with a comfort level unheard of in art theft, which led to the theory that it was perhaps an inside job. The police periodically still interview one of the guards, who was then 23-year-old musician at the time, but he's still alive and living in Vermont. The theft remains unsolved, although the museum's commitment has not diminished since it occurred 33 years ago. And the museum now, I know it says it's $5 million, but they've upped it. And because the price of all of those paintings certainly have gone up in value, they've now raised it to a $10 million for the safe return of the stolen work. But the statute of limitations has run out for the prosecution of the robbers. So they're really just interested in having the paintings back. And that's the end of our story today. And I thank you all for coming and being there and listening so attentively. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them.